In addition to hundreds of fascinating locations that are intimately involved with major and side quests, there are dozens of unmarked and other minor locations in the game that we may never visit if we just follow the quests. Each of these locations is interesting in its own right, tells its own story, and may have some compelling loot. This is the first episode in a series where we will explore the unmarked and minor locations of Fallout 4. The first on our list today is the Vitale Pumphouse. We find the Vitale Pumphouse by traveling to Finch Farm and looking across the water towards the Hub City auto wreckers. We see a tiny little bunker-looking thing peeking out of the rock. The door is already ajar. Heading inside, we can loot some brain fungus on the wall, and then more as we round the corner. There's some Med-X and a nearby toolbox, and then a duffel bag filled with all sorts of ammunition. Next to the duffel bag, we can open the door to the pump house. Inside, we can go down the stairs. Be careful, there is an oil slick on the ground. After angering X688, we can head down the stairs where we see a window into an adjacent room, but it's hard to see what's over there. Nearby, we see a console with 4 buttons. These must have something to do with the nearby inaccessible door. We can't pick it, we don't see a terminal. How exactly do we open this? Exploring the rest of this room, we see barrels stored under the stairs and bones laid out on a table. Directly above this, we see some graffiti painted on a wall. 10451. 10451. Could this have something to do with the console? Pushing one of the buttons. Oh, what's this? A number fades into existence towards the top. But we have a bit of a problem here. The code was 5 digits, but here we only see room for 4 numbers. It's only after cycling through number 9 that we realize that these are not single-digit numbers. They can go to 10. So, with the first tag as 10, we can go 10, 4, 5, 1. And the door opens. Inside, we see a bloody, eviscerated corpse on the ground. We can loot a fusion core from a nearby generator. The skeleton's head lies on the ground between his legs, and on the ground near his left hand, we find a unique .44 caliber pistol. The Gainer sets targets on fire for 15 points of damage. Once done, we can loot the nearby end-of-dungeon steamer trunk, which has a decent stash of chems and some armor. And that's it for the Vitale Pumphouse. The code is a bit of an inside joke. Part of the code is a recurring series of numbers found in other first-person shooters and RPG games. It first appeared in System Shock and went on to appear in Dishonored, BioShock, Gone Home, and many others. The code may also be a reference to Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. According to the novel, 451 is the degrees in Fahrenheit at which books burn. It is no coincidence then, I think, that the legendary effect on this weapon is an incendiary one, which inflicts enemies with 15 points of burning damage over time. It can be modified, but it comes with a standard receiver, a bull barrel, a comfort grip, and a reflex sight. Our next location is on the northern side of the Massachusetts Avenue Bridge. This bridge is broken in the game, but it leads to the Cambridge area. If we follow Massachusetts Avenue north, we eventually come upon a series of ramps connecting a few of the nearby buildings near to a wrecked truck and a wrecked bus. As soon as we get close, the nearby raiders attack.
Please don't run. Oh, hell no! Thought I heard something move. Spread out! Find him! Found you.
X688 took care of another raider that was inside the bus on the ground. This place is called the Major Crossroads because it's set on an intersection between Massachusetts Avenue and what is likely Vassar Street. We ran through quickly to kill the raiders, but now we can take some time to explore. On this rooftop, we find a skeleton beneath some rubble. The floor above has collapsed on in. Exploring the perimeter first, we find a fire escape on the western side of the building that goes up to the next level. We can follow this around to a hole in the wall, or we can take it all the way back down to the ground. Heading into the hole in the wall, we find a small nook with a couple of wooden crates, one of which has a Molotov cocktail and some Ranaway inside, and an advanced unlocked, wall-mounted safe. Inside we find a tidy stash of ammunition. We see that this apartment complex has a collapsed roof. The billboard on top is just about to fall in. If we have a jetpack, we can hop up on top and keep our distance because the truck in the middle of the road is about to explode. We can then hop down to the floor with the skeleton we saw earlier. There was a door in the back of this room. Inside, we find an old living room with a child's bike on the ground and a TV. On the wall next to a water cooler is a first aid box with a stim pack and some Radway inside. And near to a mattress is an ammo box with a nice selection of missiles. Heading out, we can turn left. The fire escape connects to the one we saw earlier that leads to the roof. And from here, we can walk across a ramp made from street signs and billboards that connect to a nearby building. Here we find a stim pack on a desk with some 10mm ammunition, some chems in a box on the wall, and then to continue exploring we need a jetpack. There's no ramp up to the next level. Using a jetpack, we can tiptoe along this narrow ledge where we find a big wrecked bathroom. Heading through a hole in the wall, we can turn left. We see an office desk that we can loot for caps, and then the collapsed roof has formed a rubble ramp we can take to the top. But there's nothing up here, though it does give us a good view of the nearby area, from which we can see a lot of sights, including a nearby well-lit garage. Next up is the L Street Bathhouse. We find the L Street Bathhouse near to a flooded section of South Boston. If we arrive from the north, we immediately have to kill a mirelurk.
I think we're being shadowed.
The bathhouse has become infested with mirelurks, and their eggs litter the mud. Upon walking through the main doors, we awaken 2 nearby mirelurks.
Good. We're starting to get bored. Let's do this.
We see the men's restroom to the east and the women's restroom to the west. But before we explore either of them, we can head outside to clear the perimeter of mirelurks.
There's someone. Gotcha. Threat eliminated.
With the mirelurks dead, we can loot the remaining eggs for mirelurk omelets. There is a dock here, and at the end of the dock is a dog bowl on a tire. No containers to loot. Heading inside, we'll explore the women's restroom to the west first. We see that 200 years of sand, mud, and other sediment has begun to bury the toilets and sinks in muck. The L Street Bathhouse is close to a nearby raider den, which we will explore in a minute, so it is possible to attract unwanted attention. Continuing to explore the women's restroom, we come to some lockers. Each of these lockers gives us a chance to get ammunition from Scrounger or bottle caps from Fortune Finder. This end is pretty well destroyed. We can walk right through the walls into the flooded street beyond. But turning around, we can head east to explore the men's restroom. As soon as we enter, another mirelurk pops out of the mud.
There's someone else here. Target spotted.
Here we find more lockers to loot. There are lots of mirelurk eggs here. We can use Pain Train to clear all the hatchlings if they hatch. There is a shower to the southwest with a first aid kit on the wall. And then we find the urinals and toilets as we continue east. A great place to go to stock up on mirelurk eggs. Next up, we'll visit the South Boston High School. This is a marked location, but it's really tiny. I wanted to include it because I attracted the attention of the raiders guarding this high school while I was exploring the L Street Bathhouse. The raiders have created a series of small shacks just outside the high school where they have set up camp. After killing all the raiders, we can loot the shacks where we find a duffel bag filled with ammunition and a combat shotgun. More interesting, however, as we explore the labyrinth, we find a hole in a wall that leads to a lit green door. This brings us to a high school. We find ourselves in a large vaulted interior. The place is thick with dust and particles. To the northwest, we see plaques and awards on the wall. We can't read any of these, but we see a display case. This must have been where the school showed off all of their commendations. Continuing along, we can loot some lockers. We even find a Vault-Tec Lunch Box, and if our luck is high enough, we can get a model robot. Near to this is another Vault-Tec Lunch Box. Inside this one, I found a Nuka-Cola Quantum. It's hard to continue exploring this first floor, as the second floor has caved in, forming a rubble ramp. So to continue exploring the first floor, we need to head to the south, where we find two doors to the right and left. Opening the door to the right, we see dismembered pieces of a large statue of some sort. It looks like all of the pieces are here: a torso, a left leg, an arm on a shelf. We find a hand and a head on the other shelf. Looks like we're missing one arm and one leg. We find the base of this statue in the graveyard of the nearby church. So it means that the kids at the school hacked off the pieces of this statue and brought them to the school. This may be a reference to an episode of The Simpsons where Bart sawed off the head to the statue of Jebediah Springfield because they thought some of the other kids would think it's cool. The other door to the east is just a boys' bathroom. We find a first aid box on the wall next to some urinals, and a skeleton on the ground, of course, next to a lighter, because you know this is what boys do in the bathroom, smoke their cigarettes. Those mad lads! There is another skeleton by a toilet in one of the stalls. A plunger is right next to his head. Don't know if this had anything to do with his death. Heading out, we can scale the rubble ramp to the second floor, and we see that there's not much of a second floor to be had. There is a door to the south. Raiders at one point may have used this as a bed. We find a mattress on the ground. There is a chemistry station in one corner, and an advanced locked safe on the wall. Inside we can find a lot of ammunition and bottle caps. And that's it for the South Boston High School. One may be tempted to turn this into a makeshift player home, except for the fact that the raiders outside will likely respawn. Next up is the Dorchester Heights Monument, which is found near to the South Boston High School. In fact, if we come here before clearing the raiders there, we'll likely draw their attention. We see erected on a large pedestal, a monument shaped like a tower. There are 4 park benches leading up to the tower. All we find here is some jet by some burning candles at the base of the monument. We do see a window peering out of the tower, but no stairway or door or hatch that leads up there. The monument here was erected in 1898. It was designed by the architectural firm Peabody and Stearns, and it was made from white marble, following the design stylings of the Georgian Revival. The tower commemorates our 1776 victory against the British, and the tower and its surrounding park was added to the country's National Register of Historic Places in 1966. Now, even though we find no stairway or other way to scale it, if we have some power armor with a jetpack, we can walk into the ruins of a nearby brick building to the east, right across the street from the Button Gwinnett Brewery, and then climb some stairs to the top of the ruin. Using the jetpack, we can leap atop the roof, and then from here, aided with a little bit of jet, we can leap atop the monument. If we do, we not only get a grand view of nearby Dorchester Heights, but we discover that the pike at the pinnacle of the monument has no boundaries, which means we can clip right through it, but it does offer a magnificent view of nearby Dorchester Heights. From here, we can even see a fusion generator on the roofs of one of the nearby buildings, sail on over, and loot the fusion core. Next up is the Beacon Hill Apartments, which brings up something I've always wondered. Why do they call them apartments if they're so close together? Anyway, we find the Beacon Hill Apartments on the southeastern side of Longfellow Bridge. But as we get close, we see that this side of the bridge is barricaded off by a bunch of raiders. If we want to catch these raiders by surprise, it may be better to head north up the Charles and go across the Charles River Dam Road Bridge, which is a drawbridge, and it is up, so we'll need a jetpack to cross it. We can then follow the water south to sneak up behind the raider encampment by this bridge. After clearing the raiders on the ground, we get shot at by raiders at the top of the nearby towers. We see that they've made some sort of bridge between the towers out of scrap wood and billboards. I managed to kill one, but there was one other who eluded me. How do we get him? Well, the answer lies on the other side of a big blue metal door directly beneath a gray tortoise cigarette billboard. This leads inside to the apartments. The only quest that brings us here is the Institute Radiant quest called Reclamation. Sometimes the raiders will kidnap Gen 1 synths, and we come here to rescue them. On this ground floor, we can loot a few containers, a few mailboxes, and then head up the stairs. This brings us to the second floor, where we find a raider. This clumsy attempt at stealth has alerted many of the other raiders in this building. We get attacked by another from the stair railings above us.
Back to work.
This first floor hallway is completely caved in. We don't have access to any of the apartments we could have accessed here. Instead, we find a tool case and an enamel bucket on a roll cart. That's about it. So heading back to the staircase, we can continue up to the third floor. Here we find a bunch of bottles lining the perimeter. At the top, we can peer around the corner where we don't find any more raiders. We killed the guy that was here. All we find is a telephone on a stool next to a completely wrecked toilet. So heading on up to the fourth floor, we hear the sound of a raider taking drugs. Looks like we successfully sneaked by this cymbal-clacking monkey trap on a ledge overlooking the staircase. Peering around the corner, we see that this floor does lead to one of the apartments. And peering inside, we find the raider.
I think we're being shot at.
With the raider dead, we can head back outside and blast that cymbal-clacking monkey just for good measure. At the end of the hallway is one container to loot. Not much else, so going into the apartment, we can loot an overdue book inside the broken refrigerator, which we can return for some loot. And then on a nearby counter, we find one Med-X. In the bathroom, we find a bottle cap mine in the shower and some toothpaste and a toothbrush in the sink. Turning around, we can open the door to Beacon Hill. This brings us to the roof, but we find scaffolding here that we can follow up even higher. At the top, we can peer across the roof. We see sandbag barricades on the other side. Looks like these raiders are dug in, and climbing all the way to the top, we find him. There's a tiny raider shack, but there's nothing inside. So to continue exploring, peering over the sandbag barricade, we see the ramp they've created spanning the street. Heading down, we can creep across the ramp where we find a big red end of dungeon steamer trunk with some bottle caps and loot inside. After looting the raider, we can head into the small shack to the east where we can loot an ammo box and then unlock an advanced locked safe with more randomized loot inside. To leave, we can either jump down if we're in power armor or take the fire ladder to the north. This brings us almost all the way to the ground, but when we reach the bottom, we do have to jump a little bit, or we can use our jetpack and sail on over to a nearby wrecked building where we find another safe. This one locked with a master lock, and inside, more randomized loot. Next up is Madden's Boxing Gym. We can stumble upon this while sailing from rooftop to rooftop near Pickman's Gallery. We see a big green sign, Madden's. Hopping on down to the ground, we see a door in the corner of this building. This boxing gym is really close to Pickman Gallery. Turning on the local map, we see Pickman Gallery and the Old North Church. Heading inside, we see exactly what we would expect, a big boxing gym. We find some buff out in a magazine case to the left. There's a bell on a concrete pillar that we can ring. We find a novice-locked footlocker beneath a big rusting shelf. Inside, some randomized loot. Following the perimeter of the wall, we turn north to stumble upon the office. In the office is an advanced locked safe with even more randomized loot. Ammo, caps, all sorts of goodies. After looting the filing cabinets, we can loot some Med-X and buff out. In one of the drawers, looks like these boxers weren't winning without doping up. Heading to the northeastern side, we see some dumbbells and curl bars on the ground. There's 2 more pieces of buff out on a nearby bench, and humorously, to the east, we see a little tiny toy alien next to a jar of buff out lifting some weights. And he's pressing the heaviest dumbbell in the gym. He's pressing the 160-pound dumbbell. Looking at the others, we find an 80-pound dumbbell with some more buff out nearby, a 20-pound dumbbell, an 80-pound curl bar, but no 160-pound dumbbell. So that's one strong toy alien. Heading into the ring, we see a service member's skeleton hanging from the ring outside the rope. He looks like he's been knocked back. Could this guy have been killed before the bombs dropped? After all, these guys were doping. And And on the ground in the middle of the ring is a boxing glove. Now, typically I'll cover unique items, but this isn't a unique item. We do find other boxing gloves in the game, including at the Madden's boxing gym at the General Atomics Galleria. These also sometimes appear on merchant inventories. After looting one more piece of buff out, wow, we walk away with a lot of this stuff, we can head out the door. Incidentally, Madden's is the starting point for access to another unmarked location. If we head up the nearby scaffolding, we arrive in a destroyed room. The rubble has made a ramp that we can use to get to the top, and we see that someone has used plywood to create a ramp, allowing us to navigate the rooftop. From the top, we have two paths. We can go down a fire escape to the northwest, which brings us all the way to the ground, or going back up the fire escape, we can follow the plywood path to the southwest. This snakes along the rooftop until we're right by the big Madden's Gym sign. Then it starts to snake down to the rooftops of nearby buildings. We can follow it all the way to a rooftop overlooking a graveyard where we may have to get rid of some ghouls.
Waste of ammo.
And then turning around, we see that it continues to the northwest. It connects this roof to a nearby roof, then to another building, ending at a ramp that brings us up to an unmarked apartment. I covered this apartment in a previous video because inside this apartment, we find the Ladies Auxiliary tape number 8. There are a few more of these tapes in the world, so if you want to find out more, check out my video on the Ladies Auxiliary, which you can watch here. Next up is Flagon Tunnel. We find Flagon Tunnel really close to Hangman Alley. After leaving Hangman Alley, we turn south into another alleyway past a broken refrigerator on the ground, up some stairs until we reach a road. This road goes east into a tunnel. Partially blocking the tunnel is a large blue truck. Above the tunnel is one of those monolithic pre-war creepy faces, but this one is partially destroyed. The chin is completely missing. The interior of this tunnel is lined with red tile. Creeping on through, we see a number of ruined cars, still sitting where they were the day the bombs dropped. As the tunnel goes downhill, we see that the bottom portion is flooded. And next to this, we see some light coming from a nearby hole. Are these raiders? Peering through, we see someone, but he's not hostile. Walking on over, we find out that this guy is a trader.
Hi.
Hey, Scava. Let's trade.
Anything been happening around here?
Not really. Let's get back to talking about all these great items I have for sale.
Let's see what you have.
But his inventory is really disappointing. He's got quite a selection of junk, but hardly any ammunition, and the only aid he has is iguana on a stick, no weapons and no armor. To leave, we can head out and turn east. After looting a washing machine and a blasted-out van, we exit Flagon Tunnel, and we find ourselves on the other side of Hangman Alley. The last unmarked location we'll explore today is the Cambridge Hardware Store. We can find the Cambridge Hardware Store by traveling southwest of Mass Gravel and Sand. We know we're headed in the right direction if we find a large antenna piercing the sky, kept in place by leads, stretching off in all directions. This antenna is fenced in, but there's no terminal or anything else here. So passing it, we can head southeast until we find a big ruined building that says hardware in neon above the door. There's a big gray tortoise cigarettes promotional poster outside. We find this building on the outskirts of Lexington. The front door is blocked in by a whole bunch of merchandise stands, so to enter we need to go through the side door. The main shopping floor is completely empty. We don't find anything on the shelves, and the second floor has a big hole in it, pouring down into the first floor. Really all we find down here is behind the counter. We find some pre-war money on the countertop, and a stash of bottle caps and ammunition in the cash register. After looting the containers behind the counter, we can head up the stairs. Here we can pass through a broken wall to an office desk, upon which we find a back storage key on a keychain with a big blue Nuka-Cola bottle. Well, where there is a back storage key, there must be a back storage. After looting the tool case and the desk and the other containers in the southern portion of this building, we can leap out of a broken wall and walk around the building to the back. Here we find a big shack. We can use the key we found to unlock the back storage. As soon as we enter, we see a big smudge of blood on the ground. We can loot a toolbox and 2 containers to the west, and then closing the door for a better look to the northeast, we see that the blood smudges create a trail to the body of a U.S. serviceman. How could this man be here? There are a couple of explanations. Perhaps as the bombs dropped, he collected all of his belongings in this big green duffel bag near his head and searched frantically for a place to hide. But as he ran around outside, he became exposed to too much radiation, or perhaps got hit by stray fire from looters. Injured and dying, he crawled into this shack to die. However, we find the door locked. We find the key on a desk in the hardware store, which means someone locked him in here, went into the hardware store, and placed the key on the manager's desk. This is not an accidental death. This is a murder scene. The manager of this hardware store, for some reason, murdered this U.S. serviceman, dragged his body into the back storage shed, along with the duffel bag filled with goods, and then locked him in here. We find no explanation for this pre-war murder, only evidence that it happened. After looting a first aid kit on the wall, we can open the door and leave the shed. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. 9 unmarked or minor locations in Fallout 4. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more that we can explore. What are some of your favorites? I know a whole lot, but I'm not going to pretend that I know them all. If you've got a personal favorite that you would love me to investigate, let me know in the comments section below. Do you like videos like this where we cover unmarked and side locations? And would you like me to do this sort of thing for Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas? Feel free to share your thoughts with me because I take notes. Thanks for watching, everyone. I publish a new Fallout video 6 days a week on a wide range of topics spanning all of the games. So if you want to make sure that you don't miss my next video, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook to keep up to date with all Oxhorn news. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, with a brand new video.
Who's there?